computer. Okay. Welcome, everybody. This is the first meeting of 4 about Guy Debord's films. And I'm just going to give some introductory remarks here, and then we'll look at the films. The first thing is I'm going to outline what's happening. This is, as I say, the first of 4 meetings. This meeting is being recorded. The next 2 meetings will not be recorded. And then the final meeting 6 weeks from now will also record that one. Because it's being recorded, we'll have less discussion and more Q&A so that we can kind of proceed and give everybody a chance to ask questions and so on, and not get off into too many digressions. So I assume if you're in this group, Guy Debord probably doesn't need any introduction. He was one of the founders of the Situationist International and author of books and of these films. And when he was first starting out as a young man in Paris around the early 50s, he hung out with this group called the Lettrists, which was a sort of strange avant-garde group that I won't even go into what, they were sort of following up on surrealism and Dadaism and other things like that. And among other things, this group had made some experimental films. And so Debord fell in with these people, and he liked what they were doing with these films. And so in 1952, he made a film, and he at first planned to do it with a lot of blank spaces and silences, but also with some images and so on. And then the more he thought about it, he thought, actually, I'm going to edit out all those images so that this will be a film which has a soundtrack, but it will not have any images whatsoever. And when the sound is happening, like when people are speaking, the screen is blank white. And when sound is not happening, the screen is blank black or dark. And so he actually created this 80-minute film, of which about 60 of the minutes are all black, blank, silent. And then there's just little bits of spoken part. So we're not going to see that whole thing, obviously, although it's an interesting concept to imagine that the first people that saw this film didn't know that it was without images, and they kept maybe hanging in there thinking that something was going to happen. So it was definitely a disruptive thing, and when they figured out that it had no images, there was a riot and all this. So what we're going to do for that film is that I'm just going to play the first 6.5 minutes. And that's going to give you about 4 minutes of this spoken part, and then a 2-minute silence black. So you'll see what that feels like. And then a little bit more spoken. And then when it hits the next blank black place, I'm going to stop there. So that will just give you a little taste of what the film is like. It goes on like that for 80 minutes. And then we're going to segue right into his 2 subsequent films, which are 20 minutes each. After he had formed the Situationists International with some other people, including his first wife, Michelle Bernstein, and the artist Oscar Jorn, and a few other people. Jorn suggested that he would finance, Jorn as an artist had some extra money, he would finance some shorts for Debord. So Debord made this next film that was called On the Passage of a Few Persons Through a Rather Brief unity of time. And just before I get there, when we're in that first film, which is called Howls for Sade, like the Marquis de Sade, uh, five voices are appearing in there, one of which is Debord's, the other letters people. And it's preceded by a letrist improvisation, this kind of goofy, by Gilles Volman, one of Debord's letrist buddies. And then some of the things that are read are from passages from the French Civil Code. And then there's a mention of Jacques Vacher and Arthur Crevin, who were kind of Dadaist or neo-Dadaist people of the 1910s and so on. So then when we get to this second film, that does have images. And that second film is basically about the origins of the situationist movement. So it's actually talking about these people in the letrist movement and the letrist movement after Debord and his friends broke from lettrism and went their own way. And then when they formed the Situationists International with other kind of avant-garde artist type people. So it's talking about them. So it's kind of it doesn't show them for the most part, but it's talking about their spirit, like that they're in Paris and what their lives are like and so on. And uh, how they view the world, their psychogeographical notions, critiques of the cinema, critiques of documentary cinema, and so on. And you will see in that film a picture of Debord, a photo of Debord, his wife Michelle Bernstein, Oscar Jorn, and another young woman with Debord. And then when it says the men of order have once again revolted, this is referring to the Algerian War, which is going on at that time, 1959, where some of the right-wing generals were revolting to, pressure a stronger, reaction to the Algerian revolt. And let's see. Anyway, the rest of that is pretty self-explanatory. And then the third film, also 20 minutes, was made in 1961. It's called Critique of Separation. And in the third film, there are three voices, Debord. In this third film, it's just Debord's voice, except for a brief thing of a woman right during the credits. And Debord appears live in this film, sometimes walking around in Paris with this young woman who is not his wife, but somebody that he was having an affair with, presumably. And this has a sort of amusing credits, at the beginning it says, coming soon to this screen. This film is talking about itself. One of the greatest anti-films of all time. Real people, a true story on a theme the cinema has never dared to confront. And it's kind of funny, but actually it's literally true. Debord does not just joke. I mean, he knows it's funny, but he also knows that it's true, whether you do or not. And in that film, where it says the news clip where he's talking about separations, he's really talking about this, what we later hear of as this spectacle, that we're separated from, we're isolated, things happen outside of our control. Official news is elsewhere. Presenting its own thing of pictures of rulers. And then you see pictures of Khrushchev and de Gaulle and Eisenhower and Franco and so on. And then there's but this dominant thing is called into question each time unknown people try to live differently. But it's always far away. We remain outside of it. it's just another spectacle. And then while that's going on, you see pictures of a riot in the Congo, which is during the decolonization period in the early 60s. And then you see a picture of a woman. That woman is an Algerian woman named Jamila Bouhired, and she's undergoing or has been undergoing torture. She was caught throwing a bomb in a cafe in Algiers. So that was something that was very current when this film was being made. And then at the end of that film, you'll see a picture of Debord alternating with a picture of Bjorn, and they're sort of exchanging views on what the film that we've just seen is about or what you can do with it. And then that's the end of the film. And when we get to that point, we'll shift to the Q&A. So now I'm going to, without further ado, share the first film, the first 6 minutes or so. So let me get up here. We'll share. Okay.
Le film de Ernest Debord, Hurlement en faveur de Sade. Hurlement en faveur de Sade est dédié à Gilles J. Holman.
Article 115. Lorsqu'une personne aura cessé de paraître au lieu de son domicile ou de sa résidence et que depuis 4 ans on n'en aura point eu de nouvelles, les parties intéressées pourront se pourvoir devant le tribunal de première instance afin que l'absence soit déclarée.
L'amour n'est valable que dans une période pré-révolutionnaire. Toutes ne t'aiment pas, tu mens. Les arts commencent, s'élargissent et disparaissent, parce que des hommes insatisfaits dépassent le monde des expressions officielles et les festivals de sa pauvreté.
Dis, tu as couché avec Françoise?
Quel printemps! Aide-mémoire pour une histoire du cinéma. 1906, Voyage dans la Lune. 1920, Le cabinet du docteur Caligari. 1924, Entracte. 1926, Le cuirassé Potemkin. 1928, Un chien andalou. 1931, Les lumières de la ville. Naissance de Ernest Debord. 1951, Traité de bave et d'éternité. 1952, L'anticoncept. Hurlement en faveur de Sade.
Au moment où la projection allait commencer, Ernest Debord devait monter sur la scène pour prononcer quelques mots d'introduction. Il aurait simplement dit « Il n'y a pas de film. Le cinéma est mort. Il ne peut plus y avoir de film. Passons, si vous voulez, au débat. »
Article 516. Tous les biens sont meubles ou immeubles.
Pour ne plus jamais être seul. Elle est la laideur et la beauté, elle est comme tout ce que nous aimons aujourd'hui. Les arts futurs seront des bouleversements de situation ou rien.
Dans les cafés de Saint-Germain-des-Prés.
Tu sais, tu me plais beaucoup.
Un important commando de lettristes, constitué d'une 30aine de membres, tous revêtus de cet uniforme crasseux, qui est leur seule marque vraiment originale, débarqua sur la Croisette, avec le désir bien arrêté de se livrer à quelques scandales susceptibles d'attirer l'attention sur eux.
Le bonheur est une idée neuve en Europe.
Je ne connais que les actions des hommes, mais les hommes se substituent à mes yeux les uns aux autres. En fin de compte, les œuvres seules nous diversifient.
Et leur révolte devenait des conformismes.
Article 488. La majorité est fixée à 21 ans accomplis. À cet âge, on est capable de tous les actes de la vie civile.
Sa mémoire la retrouvait toujours, dans un éblouissement brûlé par tous les feux d'artifice du sodium au contact de l'eau.
Il savait bien que rien ne resterait de ses gestes dans une ville qui tourne avec la Terre, et la Terre tourne dans sa galaxie, qui est une partie assez peu considérable d'un îlot qui fuit à l'infini hors de nous-mêmes. Tout le noir, les yeux fermés sur l'excès du désastre.
Okay, everybody see that okay in here? Okay, now we'll move on to the second film, Sur le Passage. Let's see.
Einer von denen etwas darüber sagen, von den Holländern.
Ich möchte dazu sagen, das ist so grob gefasst, dass man von Punkten noch gar nicht springen kann.
C'est conçu si largement qu'on ne peut pas parler maintenant d'un point. C'est trop vaste.
Ce n'est pas l'affaire du centre d'Amsterdam. D'engager
Nicht die Aufgabe des Zentrums von Amsterdam.
l'activité des autres. C'est la tâche des autres de s'intéresser aux problèmes de l'urbanisme unitaire qui a été entamé par les autres.
C'est à nous ici d'engager le centre d'Amsterdam dans une direction.
Oui, mais eux, ils savent beaucoup plus que nous.
Le souvenir est lié au monde des œuvres permanentes. Le souvenir de Rembrandt, ce sont les tableaux dans les musées. Alors nous avons beaucoup d'orgueil, mais pas celui d'être Rembrandt dans les musées.
Que lui, il ne traduit pas en hollandais, par audience.
Ce quartier était fait pour la dignité malheureuse de la petite bourgeoisie, pour les emplois honorables et le tourisme intellectuel. La population sédentaire des étages était abritée des influences de la rue. Ce quartier est resté le même. Il était l'environnement étranger de notre histoire. Ici était mise en acte le doute systématique à l'égard de tous les divertissements et travaux d'une société, une critique globale de son idée du bonheur. Ces gens méprisaient aussi la prétendue profondeur subjective. Ils ne s'intéressaient à rien qu'à une expression suffisante d'eux-mêmes, concrètement.
Les êtres humains ne sont pas pleinement conscients de leur vie réelle, agissent le plus souvent en tâtonnant. Leurs actes les suivent, les entraînent, les débordent par leurs conséquences. À chaque moment, donc, les groupes et les individus se trouvent devant des résultats qu'ils n'avaient pas voulu.
Ils disaient que l'oubli était leur passion dominante. Ils voulaient tout réinventer chaque jour, se rendre maîtres et possesseurs de leur propre vie. Tout comme on n'apprécie pas la valeur d'un homme selon la conception qu'il a de lui-même, on ne peut pas apprécier de telles époques de transformation selon la conscience qu'en a l'époque. Bien au contraire, on doit expliquer la conscience à l'aide des contradictions de la vie matérielle, à l'aide du conflit qui existe entre les forces de production sociale et les conditions sociales. L'élargissement de la vie quotidienne n'avait pas encore suivi les progrès atteints dans la domination de la nature. La jeunesse s'écoulait entre les divers contrôles de la résignation. Notre objectif a saisi pour vous quelques aspects d'une micro-société provisoire. La connaissance des faits empiriques reste abstraite et superficielle tant qu'elle n'a pas été concrétisée par son intégration à l'ensemble, qui seul permet de dépasser le problème partiel et abstrait pour arriver à son essence concrète et implicitement à sa signification. Ce groupe était en marge de l'économie. Il tendait à un rôle de pure consommation et d'abord de consommation libre de son temps. Il se trouvait ainsi directement occupé des variations qualitatives du quotidien, mais dépourvu de tout moyen d'intervention sur elles. L'aire de déplacement de ce groupe était très réduite. Les mêmes heures ramenaient aux mêmes endroits. Personne ne voulait dormir tôt. La discussion sur le sens de tout cela continuait.
Notre vie est un voyage dans l'hiver et dans la nuit. Nous cherchons notre passage.
La littérature abandonnée exerçait tout de même une action retardatrice au niveau de quelques formulations affectives.
Il y avait la fatigue et le froid du matin dans ce labyrinthe tant parcouru comme une énigme que nous devions résoudre. C'était une réalité en trompe-l'œil à partir de laquelle il fallait découvrir la richesse possible de la réalité. Au bord de la rivière recommençaient le soir et les caresses et l'importance d'un monde sans importance. Comme les yeux regardent beaucoup de choses confusément et n'en peuvent voir distinctement qu'une, de même la volonté peut imparfaitement tendre à divers objets et ne peut parfaitement en aimer qu'un à la fois.
Personne ne comptait sur l'avenir. Il ne serait pas possible d'être ensemble plus tard et ailleurs qu'ici. Il n'y aurait jamais de liberté plus grande.
Le refus du temps et du vieillissement isolait d'avance les rencontres dans cette zone, accidentelle et bornée, où ce qui lui manquait était ressenti comme irréparable. L'extrême incertitude quant aux moyens de subsister sans travailler était à la racine de cette hâte qui faisait les outrances nécessaires et les ruptures définitives.
On ne conteste jamais réellement une organisation de l'existence sans contester toutes les formes de langage qui appartiennent à cette organisation.
Quand elle s'exerce dans un circuit fermé, la liberté se dégrade en rêve, devient simple représentation d'elle-même. L'ambiance du jeu est par nature instable. À tout moment, la vie courante peut reprendre ses droits. La limitation locale du jeu est plus frappante encore que sa limitation temporelle. Tout jeu se déroule dans les contours de son domaine spatial. Autour du quartier, autour de son immobilité fuyante et menacée, s'étendait une ville à demi connue, où les gens ne se rencontraient que par hasard, s'égaraient sans retour. Les filles qui se trouvaient là, parce que jusqu'à l'âge de 18 ans, leur famille disposait légalement d'elles, étaient fréquemment ressaisies par les défenseurs de cette détestable institution. Elles étaient couramment enfermées sous la garde de ces êtres qui, entre tous les mauvais produits d'une mauvaise société, apparaissent les plus laids et les plus répugnants des religieuses. Ce qui, le plus souvent, permet de comprendre les documentaires, c'est la limitation arbitraire de leur sujet. Ils décrivent l'atomisation des fonctions sociales et l'isolement de leurs produits. On peut, au contraire, envisager toute la complexité d'un moment qui ne se résout pas dans un travail, dont le mouvement contient indissolublement des faits et des valeurs, et dont le sens n'apparaît pas encore. La matière du documentaire serait alors cette totalité confuse.
L'époque était parvenue à un niveau de connaissances et de moyens techniques qui rendait possible et de plus en plus nécessaire une construction directe de tous les aspects d'une existence affective et pratique libérée. L'apparition de ces moyens d'action supérieurs, encore inemployés à cause des retards survenus dans la liquidation de l'économie marchande, avait déjà condamné l'activité esthétique, dépassée quant aux ambitions et quant au pouvoir. Le dépérissement de l'art, et aussi bien de toutes les valeurs des anciennes conduites, avait formé notre base sociologique. Le monopole de la classe dominante sur les instruments qu'il nous fallait contrôler pour réaliser l'art collectif de notre temps nous avait placés en dehors même d'une production culturelle officiellement consacrée à l'illustration et à la répétition du passé. Un film d'art sur cette génération ne sera qu'un film sur l'absence de ses œuvres. Les autres suivaient sans y penser les chemins appris une fois pour toutes vers leur travail et leur maison, vers leur avenir prévisible. Pour eux déjà, le devoir était devenu une habitude et l'habitude un devoir. Ils ne voyaient pas l'insuffisance de leur ville, ils croyaient naturelle l'insuffisance de leur vie. Nous voulions sortir de ce conditionnement à la recherche d'un autre emploi du paysage urbain, de passions nouvelles. L'atmosphère de quelques lieux nous faisait sentir les pouvoirs à venir d'une architecture qu'il faudrait créer pour être le support et le cadre de jeux moins médiocres. Nous ne pouvions rien attendre de ce que nous n'aurions pas modifié nous-mêmes. Le milieu urbain proclamait les ordres et les goûts de la société dominante avec une violence égale à celle des journaux. C'est l'homme qui fait l'unité du monde, mais l'homme est répandu partout. Les hommes ne peuvent rien voir autour d'eux qui ne soit leur visage, tout leur parle d'eux-mêmes, leur tout paysage même est animé. Il y avait partout des obstacles. Il y avait une cohérence dans les obstacles de tout genre. Il maintenait le règne cohérent de la misère. Tout étant lié, il fallait tout changer par une lutte unitaire ou rien. Il fallait rejoindre des masses, mais autour de nous le sommeil.
La dictature du prolétariat est une lutte acharnée, sanglante et non sanglante, violente et pacifique, militaire, économique, pédagogique et administrative contre les forces et les traditions du vieux monde.
Finalement, dans ce pays, cette fois encore, ce sont les hommes d'ordre qui en sont venus à se faire émeutiers. Ils ont assuré davantage leur pouvoir. Le grotesque des conditions dominantes, ils ont pu l'aggraver selon leur cœur. Ils ont décoré leur système avec les pompes funèbres du passé.
Des années, comme un seul instant prolongé jusque-là, prennent fin.
Ce qui était immédiatement vécu reparaît figé dans la distance, inscrit dans les goûts et les illusions d'une époque, emporté avec elle.
L'apparition d'événements que nous n'avons pas faits, que d'autres ont fait contre nous, nous oblige à mesurer désormais le passage du temps, ses résultats, la transformation de nos propres désirs en événements. Ce qui différencie le passé du présent est précisément son objectivité hors d'atteinte. Il n'y a plus de devoir-être. L'être est à ce point consommé qu'il a perdu l'existence. Les détails sont déjà perdus dans la poussière du temps, laquelle avait peur de la vie, avait peur de la nuit, avait peur d'être prise, avait peur d'être gardée.
Ce qui doit être aboli continue, et notre usure continue avec. On nous abîme, on nous sépare. Les années passent et nous n'avons rien changé.
Encore une fois, le matin, dans les mêmes rues. Encore une fois, la fatigue de tant de nuits pareillement traversées. C'est une marche qui a beaucoup duré.
Vraiment difficile de boire davantage.
Évidemment, on peut à l'occasion en faire un film. Cependant, même au cas où ce film réussirait à être aussi fondamentalement incohérent et insatisfaisant que la réalité dont il traite, il ne sera jamais qu'une reconstitution, pauvre et fausse comme ce travelling manqué.
Il y a maintenant des gens qui se flattent d'être auteurs de films, comme on l'était de romans. Leur retard sur les romanciers, c'est d'ignorer la décomposition et l'épuisement de l'expression individuelle dans notre temps, la fin des arts de la passivité. On entend louer leur sincérité puisqu'ils mettent en scène, avec plus de profondeur personnelle, les conventions dont ils sont faits. On entend parler de libération du cinéma, mais que nous importe la libération d'un art de plus, à travers lequel Pierre, Jacques ou François pourront exprimer joyeusement leurs sentiments d'esclaves. L'unique entreprise intéressante, c'est la libération de la vie quotidienne, pas seulement dans les perspectives de l'histoire, mais pour nous et tout de suite. Ceci passe par le dépérissement des formes aliénées de la communication. Le cinéma est à détruire aussi.
En dernière analyse, ce n'est ni le talent, ni l'absence de talent, ni même l'industrie cinématographique ou la publicité, c'est le besoin qu'on a d'elle qui crée la star. C'est la misère du besoin, c'est la vie morne et anonyme qui voudrait s'élargir aux dimensions de la vie de cinéma. La vie imaginaire de l'écran est le produit de ce besoin réel, la star est la projection de ce besoin. Les images des entr'actes conviennent mieux que toutes les autres pour évoquer un entr'acte de la vie. Pour décrire effectivement cette époque, il faudrait sans doute montrer beaucoup d'autres choses. Mais à quoi bon? Il faudrait plutôt comprendre la totalité de ce qui s'est fait, ce qui reste à faire, et non ajouter d'autres ruines au vieux monde du spectacle et des souvenirs.
Quand on songe combien il est naturel et avantageux pour l'homme d'identifier sa langue et la réalité, on devine quel degré de sophistication il lui a fallu atteindre pour les dissocier et faire de chacune un objet d'étude. Ceci est une citation du livre d'André Martinet, Éléments de linguistique générale. Le documentaire que vous allez voir s'appelle Critique de la séparation. Il a été écrit et réalisé par Guy Debord. Les images sont d'André Mrugalski. Chantal Delattre a fait le montage. Ce film, achevé au mois de février 1961, est produit par la Dansk Fransk Experimental Film Company.
On ne sait que dire. La suite des mots se refait et les gestes se reconnaissent en dehors de nous. Bien sûr, il y a des procédés maîtrisés, des résultats vérifiables. C'est très souvent amusant. Mais tant de choses que l'on voulait n'ont pas été atteintes, ou partiellement, et pas comme on le croyait. Quelle communication a-t-on désiré, ou connu, ou seulement simulé? Quel projet véritable a été perdu? Le spectacle cinématographique a ses règles qui permettent d'aboutir à des produits satisfaisants. Cependant, la réalité dont il faut partir, c'est l'insatisfaction. La fonction du cinéma est de présenter une fausse cohérence isolée, dramatique ou documentaire, comme remplacement d'une communication et d'une activité absente. Pour démystifier le cinéma documentaire, il faut dissoudre ce que l'on appelle son sujet. Une recette bien établie fait savoir que dans un film, tout ce qui est dit autrement que par l'image doit être répété, sinon le sens en échappera au spectateur. C'est possible, mais cette incompréhension est partout dans les rencontres quotidiennes. Il faudrait préciser, mais le temps manque et l'on n'est pas sûr d'avoir été compris. Avant d'avoir su faire ou dire ce qu'il fallait, on s'est déjà éloigné. On a traversé la rue, on est allé outre-mer, on ne peut se reprendre. Après tous les temps morts et les moments perdus, restent ces paysages de cartes postales traversés sans fin, cette distance organisée entre chacun et tous. L'enfance, mais c'est ici, nous n'en sommes jamais sortis. Notre époque accumule des pouvoirs et se rêve rationnel, mais personne ne reconnaît comme sien de tels pouvoirs. Il n'y a nulle part d'accès à l'âge adulte, seulement la transformation possible, un jour, de cette longue inquiétude en sommeil mesuré. C'est parce que personne ne cesse d'être tenu en tutelle. La question n'est pas de constater que les gens vivent plus ou moins pauvrement, mais toujours d'une manière qui leur échappe. En même temps, c'est un monde où nous avons fait l'apprentissage du changement. Rien ne s'y arrête. Il apparaît sans cesse plus mobile. Et ceux qui le produisent, jour après jour, contre eux-mêmes, peuvent se l'approprier, je le sais bien. La seule aventure, disions-nous, c'est contester la totalité, dont le centre est cette façon de vivre, où nous pouvons faire l'essai mais non l'emploi de notre force. Finalement, aucune aventure ne se constitue directement pour nous. Elle participe d'abord, en tant qu'aventure, de l'ensemble des légendes transmises, par le cinéma ou autrement, de toute la pacotille spectaculaire de l'histoire. Avant la domination collective de l'environnement, il n'y a pas encore d'individus, mais des ombres hantant les choses qui leur sont anarchiquement données par d'autres. Nous rencontrons, dans des situations occasionnelles, des gens séparés qui vont au hasard. Leurs émotions divergentes se neutralisent et maintiennent leur solide environnement d'ennui. Aussi longtemps que nous ne pourrons faire nous-mêmes notre histoire, créer librement les situations, l'effort vers l'unité introduit d'autres ruptures. La recherche d'une activité centrale en vient à constituer quelques spécialisations nouvelles. Et quelques rencontres seules furent comme des signaux venus d'une vie plus intense qui n'a pas été vraiment trouvée. Ce qui n'a pu être oublié reparaît dans les rêves. À la fin de ce genre de rêve, dans le demi-sommeil, les événements sont encore tenus pour réels un bref instant. Et les réactions qu'ils appelleraient se précisent plus exactement, plus raisonnablement, comme, tant de matin, le souvenir de ce que l'on a bu la veille. Ensuite vient la conscience que tout est faux, que ce n'est qu'un rêve, qu'il n'y a pas de fait nouveau, pas de retour vers cela, pas de prise. Ces rêves sont des éclats du passé non résolu. Ils éclairent unilatéralement des moments autrefois vécus dans la confusion et le doute. Ils font une publicité sans nuance pour ceux de nos besoins qui sont devenus sans réponse. Voici la lumière du jour et des perspectives qui, maintenant, ne signifient plus rien. Les secteurs d'une ville sont à un certain niveau lisibles, mais le sens qu'ils ont eu pour nous, personnellement, est intransmissible, comme toute cette clandestinité de la vie privée, sur laquelle on ne possède jamais que des documents dérisoires. L'information officielle est ailleurs. La société se renvoie sa propre image historique seulement comme l'histoire superficielle et statique de ses dirigeants, ceux qui incarnent la fatalité extérieure de ce qui se fait. Le secteur des dirigeants est celui-là même du spectacle. Le cinéma leur va bien. D'ailleurs, le cinéma propose partout des conduites exemplaires, fait des héros, sur le même vieux modèle que ceux-ci, avec tout ce qu'ils touchent. Pourtant, tout équilibre existant est remis en question chaque fois que des hommes inconnus essaient de vivre autrement. Mais toujours ce fut au loin. On l'apprend par les journaux, par les actualités. On reste à l'extérieur de ceci, comme devant un spectacle de plus. Nous en sommes séparés par notre propre non-intervention. C'est assez décevant quant à nous-mêmes. À quel moment le choix a-t-il tardé? Quand l'occasion a-t-elle été manquée? Nous n'avons pas trouvé les armes qu'il fallait, nous avons laissé faire. J'ai laissé faire le temps, j'ai laissé perdre ce qu'il fallait défendre. Cette critique générale de la séparation contient évidemment et recouvre quelques données particulières de la mémoire. Une peine moins reconnue, la conscience d'une indignité moins explicable. De quelle séparation précise s'agissait-il? Comme nous avons vécu vite, c'est à ce point de notre histoire irréfléchie que je nous revois. Tout ce qui concerne la sphère de la perte, c'est-à-dire aussi bien ce que j'ai perdu de moi-même, le temps passé, et la disparition, la fuite, et plus généralement l'écoulement des choses, et même au sens social dominant, au sens donc le plus vulgaire de l'emploi du temps, ce qui s'appelle le temps perdu, rencontre étrangement dans cette ancienne expression militaire en enfant perdu, rencontre la sphère de la découverte, de l'exploration d'un terrain inconnu, toutes les formes de la recherche, de l'aventure, de l'avant-garde. C'est à ce carrefour que nous nous sommes trouvés et perdus. Tout ceci, il faut en convenir, n'est pas clair. C'est un monologue d'ivrogne, tout à fait classique, avec ses allusions incompréhensibles et son débit fatigant, avec ses phrases vaines qui n'attendent pas de réponse et ses explications sentencieuses et ses silences. La pauvreté des moyens est chargée d'exprimer sans phare la scandaleuse pauvreté du sujet. Généralement, les événements qui arrivent dans l'existence individuelle telle qu'elle est organisée, ceux qui nous concernent réellement et exigent notre adhésion, sont précisément ceux qui ne méritent rien de plus que de nous trouver spectateurs distants et ennuyés, indifférents. Au contraire, la situation qui est vue à travers une transposition artistique quelconque est assez souvent ce qui attire, ce qui mériterait que l'on devînt acteur, participant. Voilà un paradoxe à renverser, à remettre sur ses pieds. C'est cela qu'il faut réaliser dans les actes. Et ce spectacle du passé fragmentaire et filtré, idiot, plein de bruit et de fureur, il n'est pas question de le transmettre maintenant, de le rendre, comme on dit, dans un autre spectacle ordonné, qui jouerait le jeu de la compréhension réglée et de la participation. Non. Toute expression artistique cohérente exprime déjà la cohérence du passé, la passivité. Il convient de détruire la mémoire dans l'art, de ruiner les conventions de sa communication, de démoraliser ses amateurs. Quel travail! Comme dans la vision brouillée de l'alcool, la mémoire et le langage du film se défont ensemble. À l'extrême, la subjectivité malheureuse se renverse en une certaine sorte d'objectivité, un document sur les conditions de la non-communication. Par exemple, je ne parle pas d'elle. Faux visage, faux rapport. Un personnage réel est séparé de qui l'interprète, ne serait-ce que par le temps passé entre l'événement et son évocation, par une distance qui grandira toujours, qui grandit en ce moment. Comme l'expression conservée reste elle-même en tout cas séparée de ceux qui l'entendent, abstraitement et sans pouvoir sur elle. Le spectacle, dans toute son étendue, c'est l'époque, dans laquelle une certaine jeunesse s'est reconnue, le décalage entre cette image et les résultats. Quel aspect, quel goût, quel refus et quel projet la définissaient alors, et puis comment elle s'est avancée dans la vie courante. On n'a rien inventé, on s'adapte avec quelques nuances dans le réseau des parcours possibles. On s'habitue, semble-t-il. Au retour d'une entreprise, toutes gens du monde ont moins de cœur qu'à l'aller. Beaux enfants, l'aventure est morte. Qui résistera? Il faut aller plus loin que cette défaite partielle, bien sûr. Et comment faire? C'est un film qui s'interrompt mais ne s'achève pas. Toutes les conclusions sont encore à tirer, les calculs à refaire, le problème continue d'être posé, son énoncé se complique, il faut recourir à d'autres moyens. Ce message informel, de même qu'il n'avait pas de raison profonde de commencer, de même n'en a pas de finir. Je commence à peine à vous faire comprendre que je ne veux pas jouer ce jeu-là.
Okay, I hope you were able to see that. The second film had a lot of technical glitches in it. I don't know what caused that, but hope you were able to see and hear all that okay. So raise your digital hand if you'd like to ask a question. Mike, please unmute yourself.
It seems that to me that the separations are, I mean, apart from the profound totality of the whole alienation scene, that they prime example would be factions. Factions separate people and they fight over these factions, and the factions are always based on some idea, and the idea is that this is right, and then that is right, and then that leads to the kind of disunity which perpetuates what I think he's talking about. I was wondering if, well, at least that's what I think. Does anybody else think that the root cause of our separations has to do with is rooted in idealism, both religious and philosophical? That's all. Thank you.
I think it's rooted in capitalism.
Yes, but capitalism is a separate, as he says, the separation of the products that we're producing from our own control and ownership and so forth. That's the essence of class division in society, and capitalism is just a supercharged version. That's
Other questions? Kim.
Yeah, somewhere in the back of your book, Complete Cinematic Works, in one of the essays, Debord does talk about how or at least he mentions how he's assembling the images with the music and the commentary. And so while I'm watching these, I wonder how he selected the images and the commentary that he put with them, because sometimes it makes sense. The images fit with the words you're hearing or reading, and other times it just seems random. It could, a lot of times it just seems like it could be any image put with the words that are on the screen or that we're listening to. Other times they fit together. So I had a question about, how he selected. Not that we're going to be able to know that exactly, but it came up as I was watching the films.
Yeah. I think that it is rarely random. He's like an artist in a sense, except that he's working in a sort of different dimension. If you look at a Picasso painting or any painting, basically, you could say, well, I sort of see how this works, but these other things just seem to be like he just sort of went choo, 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 and you're wondering how random that would be, but it probably isn't random in most cases. In his case, he has explored randomness by doing these things like derives. He's let himself go. He's gone through weird adventures and experiments and so on to see what happens. But he's also quite aware that if you're too random and sort of letting everything go, that actually is also very authoritarian, because if you really let yourself go with things, then you end up going along with things. you know, you're sort of falling into another pattern, even though you think that you're, you know, letting yourself be free. His making of these films is not a self-expression. It's an intention of provocation. It's an intention to create some disturbance, to call into question things. So when you see, as I think David was saying earlier, you know, whenever you read anything of Debord or something, you can be confident he's trying to fuck with you. Well, he's not doing it in a nihilist way, but he's always challenging you. And so Judy asked before we even started this thing, you know, was this phrase by him or was it by me? And well, the phrase is in his film, but that doesn't mean that's his phrase. He's got a film where various people are narrating things that's not him. It's a film he made. And if he shows a picture like in this last film where there's this woman who continually appears, who in real life was probably a lover of his, certainly she was a friend of his wife's, Michelle Bernstein, they're walking together and all that. But he's not presenting this like, oh, isn't she wonderful? Or let's, you know, isn't romance sweet or something like that. She's there. And when she's there, she's an object. She's an image, just like a brick on a wall or something. You can't assume, oh, what is she feeling? Oh, I wonder if she's sleeping with Debord, or does she look happy, or is she a bohemian, or you know, all these different things. And even when you see, for example, he talks about the people, you know, either the early situationist people or people that are, you know, living these lives, and you see people around a table. Well, in the last thing, those people that are around a table in motion, that's posed. It's not a documentary of them. Some of them are his friends, presumably. I mean, probably all of them are. Some of them may be actually the film crew or something. You know, you don't know what the hell it is. I mean, I know some of them are because I recognize there's Michelle Bernstein or there's Oscar Jorn, but some of them are just friends and they're posing. And then when he's not saying how cool these people are or how cool we are necessarily, he's using that as a place mark to represent the people that he is talking about, the people whose, you know, adventure or whose strivings or whose project he's talking about. And he puts some people in there, and you can say, oh, that doesn't look real to me, or they look kind of, she has different kind of makeup, or that doesn't look natural, or whatever. And he's quite aware of that. You know, in some of his other films, he'll take a thing from a film, a Hollywood film, that's also, you know, if you took it literally, you know, you would be saying, well, wait a minute, is he saying that we're like this? No, he isn't. He's presenting a film, and at the same time, he's critiquing the medium of film. Maybe.
I just wanted to say the woman in Critique de la Séparation who's seen walking with Michelle Bernstein, her name is Caroline Rittner. She was an actress of the New Wave.
She's also the one who read that little thing about linguistics during the thing there. So anyway, presumably she was a friend of Debord's, and she said, sure.
Maybe more.
Maybe more.
We don't really know.
Yeah, exactly. In some cases, we do know, but
Ed has a question in the chat. I'll read it.
Okay.
For people not familiar with Debord and his
this is Ed Barcelone, right?
Ed Barcelone, yes. Yeah. For people not familiar with Debord and his beginnings as a cinematographer, could you briefly mention the figure of Izu and his influence on the young Debord and the reasons why Debord distanced himself from him afterwards?
Okay, this is kind of a tough one because Isidore Isu was a Romanian guy, a Jewish guy who escaped from the Nazis and came to Paris after the World War II. And as a very young man, I mean, I think he was still a teenager or something. He was kind of a megalomaniac guy. He founded lettrism, which he, you know, felt was sort of the logical follow-up of Dadaism and Surrealism and some of these other things. And the original sense of the word letterism is that whereas previous art movements or whatever, poetic movements, had progressively decomposed, torn apart things like they do in Cubism or something like this. He proposed going beneath or beyond language by going down to just letters, not words. And so that first thing that we heard in the first film was a lecherous improvisation that was like, if you actually see that written out, it's like just a bunch of letters, written in kind of random orders. So that was one example of the kind of like extreme zaniness that this was, but it was also deadly serious. And Izu himself made a really remarkable film in which Debord mentions there in 1951 called Treatise on Slime and Eternity. And it's kind of a long film, and it did some of these things that Debord later did, for example, using a soundtrack that had no connection with what you were looking at, and then having blank spaces and, just different things that would twist around the medium to kind of challenge the medium. So when Debord was a young man, he ran into those people and was very struck by them. And he thought, okay, this is the surrealism of today. The old surrealism is kind of passe and all that. And he liked some of the things that they were doing. They were very scandalous and always, so he picked up on a lot of those things that Isu and these other people were talking about. And then at a certain point in 1952, Debord and a few of his other buddies in the lettress, namely Gilles Volman, started doing things that were even more extreme. For example, Debord's film with no images, even Isu and thought, well, wait a minute, you can't do it. There was some, maybe there was a one-upmanship or something going on here. Anyway, where Isu was sort of focused aesthetically, even when he was doing these extreme things, Debord and Volman were more focused on directly changing life. And I mean, Isu was about changing life too, but he sort of had his notion, that it would be done by these subtle aesthetic things. It's complicated. But for example, in 1952, Volman and Debord and a couple other lettrists, Charlie Chaplin was coming to Paris. And it was late in his career. And of course, by that time, he was like world famous and everybody worshiped him, as this great filmmaker and genius and all this. And you noted that Debord even mentioned City Lights as one of the key points of cinema in that first film. But Debord and the others disrupted a press conference of Chaplin with a very insulting leaflet, that just said, Chaplin, you're really a cop, behind your little, you're this, and, just really in your face kind of stuff. And he said, with the implication, you may have done some interesting things in the past, but relying on things you've done in the past is bullshit. And we're not buying it anymore. You're just coming here, having the champagne with prestigious people, and all this kind of thing. And we are denouncing you. And for Isu, that was a bit much because Isu thought Chaplin was in the legitimate, uh, you know, pantheon leading up to Isu, going through the surrealism and all this. And so Isu and the other people denounced that disruption, and that made the break clean. I mean, then Debord is saying, screw Isu. This is an example of somebody who's stuck in the past. So anyway, enough of that. Did I see Mayday? Did you have your hand
Oh
raised?
no, you covered. I was going to mention the Chaplin incident, which you
Okay,
covered.
great. Okay, any other questions? There must be many of them. Don't be shy.
Why did he? Was Chaplin leaning toward the right at that time? I mean, was he just
No,
doing
he
nothing?
was leftist. Debord is saying
So,
bullshit.
because he was just doing spectacle at this point.
He's just saying at this point,
Yeah.
this is not, it's not just another film. This is like exactly what we don't want.
Yeah.
We don't want people saying, oh, isn't he great?
Yeah.
Yay for our star. This is a classic of the film.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
a genius.
Okay.
So,
But suppose,
Judy,
I mean, if he had been producing good leftist film at the time, would Debord have been all over him, or is he
Debord would
just?
have said, what's a good leftist film?
Well, I mean, okay, so he didn't like Chaplin in the early days either.
Wrong.
Okay, he did. But what if Chaplin had continued his progress?
Well,
The type of filmmaking that
well,
Chaplin was doing in the past.
it's not so simple as say, do what you've been doing in the past. Debord would say, if you're doing what you've been doing in the past, you already lost.
Okay, but suppose he was doing something. Is there any way that Chaplin could have not been disgraced by Debord?
Sure.
Okay. What would Chaplin have
Well,
been doing?
one way would be not to show up in Paris and have champagne with all the
Right.
celebrities and be worshipped by the press and
Okay.
all
But that would be enough, just retired and silent.
that would be a better. Anyway, the point is that this happened.
Yeah, no, I get
And
it.
when it
It's funny.
happened, Debord said to his friends, let's nix this. This is exactly where we want to draw the line. No, we do not want this, even if he did exemplary things in the past. Judy? Unmute yourself. There
Okay.
you go.
I wanted you to elaborate. I agreed with you when you disagreed with Mike about how you thought the main thing that Debord was talking about was capitalism. Because I agreed with you, and I see the thing with art because I remember how disillusioned I was in the old days when all the rock stars became wealthy, like Mick Jagger, who was talking about revolution, and all of a sudden he's playing polo with Prince Charles. And it was so disillusioned. I mean, and so would you elaborate on the whole capitalism thing? Because I agree with you. I think that's the main problem here. Um, but I don't know how to.
What I suggest, I suggest this would not be a good place to go into that. Our next film is going to be the Society of the Spectacle, which is really about capitalism through and through in detail. Whereas here, we're just getting a little hint. So I don't think it would be very illuminating for us to say, what does capitalism consist of or something. Uh, it's obvious that he's against that. So I propose postponing that. Julianne, unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, I was just, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I was just thinking about the question about Chaplin, and the question of like, what if Chaplin continued to do good films or bad films? I feel like, just based on what little I do know about Debord, that he was more like anti-celebrity culture. So it wasn't a question of like what he was really doing. It was more a question of the accolades that he was getting and the fact that people just weren't questioning, what he was doing, and anything he came out with, people would applaud. And so someone has to be in the peanut gallery and saying like, even just people think about what you're doing, do you really like this or not?
Yeah, thank you. If I can mention, I've mentioned this before, but when I was first reading The Situationists back in early 1970, then my idol, Gary Snyder, came to town to give a poetry reading. And I was saying, he really wasn't an idol. I mean, I just thought he was completely exemplary. But this notion of the spectacle and all this had kind of been eating on me, and I thought, oh, is this a spectacle or so I thought I want to confront this. And so I decided the way to do this was not to debate whether is Gary Snyder a great poet or is it good to be a great poet or blah, blah, blah. I said, I'm going to go to that event with a leaflet that disrupts it, that challenges it, that talks about the event and talks about what's going on here. And it's not going to be easy because this is a good guy. It would be easy to disrupt something that was stupid, but here I was disrupting, all that. So that's what I did. And that was like a turning point of my life to do that. And I think, in other different circumstances, I think for Debord and his friends, disrupting Chaplin, just like other various breaks that they did at different points, was a liberating thing for them to begin with, and then also hopefully for other people, onlookers who say, oh, I wonder if I've been, sucked into this thing or not. So just this is a kind of basic thing there. I agree with Julianne. The point is the celebrityness. It's not so much debating about is somebody doing the radical art or not so radical art or something. Eric, unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, it was. I totally relate to the celebrity part. That seems like what he was being offended by, and as a society, that whole concept. What I wanted to ask about was at around the same time was when William Burroughs was doing his cut up type of approach to not only literature but films. And so I'm wondering if Debord was aware of that. It seems like his films are something akin to that, where the images and the narration and the music seem to be fairly random. It doesn't mean he hasn't chosen something, but the order in which they're put. And then the other thing was, though we didn't experience it And I would personally admit, I'm happy we did not experience the entirety of that first film, because it would be, I would find it excruciating. But the point on that is, at around the same time, John Cage did his famous 4:33 song, much shorter. And the idea was that in the silence, there was actually, that was what in humanity silence is. The room, the environment, it takes a song and makes it a visual experience as well. It's a performance. So I'm wondering if the silence, which would breed interiority, and one of the things that would be is to develop a discipline to understand that any thought you have, whether it's boredom, exhilaration, anger, frustration, is all part of it. And I'm wondering if that is something that Debord thought about. So the randomness of the cut up type method, and then also the interiority that is fostered by the long, drawn out nothingness of black film. So yeah, that's my question.
Yeah.
Was he aware of those?
No, no, of course he was. Yeah, no question. I think what I would say though is that Burroughs or Cage or some of these other people, he would have said that much of their thing was kind of nihilist, or uh, it did not have a revolutionary aim, or the in the same sense that Debord was trying to make this. He wasn't just trying to sort of disturb people's expectations or something, although that there's an element of that, and that's what happened back in the Dadaist period. But this is more carefully calculated. And if you read those essays in the film scripts about détournement and stuff like that, you'll also get an idea more about what positive is going on in those things. It's not just that there's unexpected juxtapositions, but the juxtapositions in some cases expand each other. I won't go into it further. Ed Matthews, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me now? All right. I know you asked for questions. I'm having a real tough time formulating a question. So imagine everything I'm going to say with a question mark at the end. Basically, just quick observations. As different as each of those three films were, what I found really effective in each one is the degree to which Debord was able to use disruption in terms of breaking the music or breaking the image, and especially the third one, Critique of Separation. I found that he really seemed to have found his voice and being able to create something that looked like a documentary style. Filmmakers like Jean Rouch were quite active and popular at this point in France. And in doing so, it's like he's lulling us into imagining a possible story. Like you're saying, these people are just, placeholders. They're just people. But we have a tendency to throw narratives into people, like, what are these two talking about? What's going to happen next? And especially in Critique, the last film, I really liked how he was able to play with things such as poetic notions like John Donne's, I forget which poem it is, where he talks about looking in his lover's eyes and seeing the world. And immediately we start thinking about this. Oh, that's what he means. Cuts away. And he says, no, there's political violence happening somewhere at the same time, right? Be careful with that. And of course, the last line, I scarcely have begun to make you understand that I don't intend to play the game. And that to me that's the line that ties all three of those films together. Now, I guess in the way of a question, other than this book here, Are there any other writings on Debord's films? Of course, his ideas, but primarily in his films. Okay, so that's another one.
This is
Because
a one. It's in French. There are 4 books
Yeah.
in French about Debord's films. At
Okay.
least there's a lot of articles too. This is a very detailed one. This is one that is more technical about the visual construction. It has a lot of stuff about you know what the images were, and so it's called the fabrique, the making of that. This is a shorter one, which I think you did hold up.
Yeah.
And there was another one that I don't have on hand. I forget the name of it, but they're listed in the bibliography of this book, which I hope you all have. I just wanted to read a little thing in on page 224 of that book, in which Debord is writing a letter to another early situationist guy who has written him about On the Passage, the second film. And Debord says, "You have rightly noted the difference of the text-image relation between the first and second parts of that." So here we're getting much more subtle. In the first parts, you get, you know, mostly deturned things. And my plan was as follows. The film begins like a typical technically ordinary documentary. Gradually, it becomes less clear and more disappointing, which might at first seem to be the result of a pretentious, quote, ideological interpretation of an otherwise clear subject. Remember, the subject is these people in Paris, because the text appears increasingly inadequate and pompously inflated. So see, if you look at the things that these people are reading, or the subtitles in French and so on going on, you think, oh, that's dumb, you know, and then intentionally, he says, then the question then arises, what is the subject of this film? Which I think represents an irritating and upsetting break with the habitual spectacle. Normally, in a film, you don't get that question. With the appearance of the first blank screen, the film begins to contradict itself in every way. I mean, what other filmmaker is thinking of, you know, and thus becomes more clear as its creator takes sides against it. Whoever heard of somebody making a film in which, at a certain point in the film, the filmmaker opposes the film by fucking with the film? I mean, nobody else is even in that planet.
There isn't
When
a
you're
filmmaker I
thinking
can
about
think of.
subversive sorts of things, you know, this isn't just playing around with, oh, I'll do some random thing here and maybe some weird thing will come up. It is both a rather explicitly anti-art film about the unaccomplished work of this era, i.e. the possibilities are unrealized, and an ultimately realistic description of a way of life, ours, deprived of coherence and significance. So if our life is deprived of those things, and it's about our life, of course it's going to be disjointed. What do we expect? The form corresponds to the content. It does not describe this or that particular activity, but the very core of present day activity in general, which is empty. It is a portrayal of the absence of real life. This slow movement of exposure and negation is what I was trying to embody in Passage. but very summarily and arbitrarily, I must admit. Despite the prevalent fixation on the economic obstacles, the main problem is actually of making films. The main problem is actually that short films are quite unsuitable for truly experimental cinema. The very brevity tends to encourage a moderate, neatly edited form of expression. But it does seem interesting to deturn the fixed form of the traditional documentary. In other words, he's taking the typical 20-minute documentary about something and kind of following the form and fucking with it, turning it around against itself. Deterring the fixed form of the traditional documentary, and this tends to tie us to the inviolable 20-minute limit. So even though we're limited there, that's what we're dealing with. So later in Society of the Spectacle, he's no longer dealing with it. He's in a whole other terrain. Other questions? Sid, unmute yourself.
This is a very interesting conversation, and the comments are very interesting also to me. I was wondering, I didn't notice any mention of the spectacle. I don't think I did.
No, there were a few mentions.
There were. I was just wondering.
It says this is just another spectacle.
Yeah.
Things are happening. But we're informed about them in the news. They're far away. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just therefore, when we're seeing these people in the Congo or Algeria or wherever, we relate to it as just another spectacle. And he has some other things there. It's the separation is what the spectacle is all about.
The separation was very clear. I was just wondering if these three films we watched were precursors to the developed ideas of the Society of the Spectacle.
Absolutely. He's experimenting and working on it all the time. So by the time he writes Society of the Spectacle in 1967, he's already been doing this for 15 years. Playing around, exploring, finding dead ends, breaking with former companions, changing his mind, making one film one way, and then the next time making a different film a different way. Trying to form a group and then changing the orientation of the group, all these different things, trying different things personally. And so out of that, I mean, he's going through different traditional leftist things and all this. Denny.
Thank you.
I have a question about For a Revolutionary Judgment of Art that we read, which had a really big impact on me. Art criticism is a second-degree spectacle, and revolution is not showing life to people, but bringing them to life. Where did that come from? I mean, who's his predecessor in this?
Well, the person
who's he building on? Who before him was talking about that?
Well, in a general way, of course, people like Marx and Bakunin and Emma Goldman and all sorts of people are talking about we have to personally do this. It's not in books. So there's always that. I mean, even Lenin and people like that talking about, you have to get in there and do it, So there's nothing very mysterious about that. It's just that after a century of these things, where you can see different revolutionary groups that seem to have some content that was radical, they're talking about abolishing capitalism and even abolishing the state and so on. But in order to do that, they organize a group and the group ends up being a bunch of passive militants and a leader or two. And so Debord early on is noting that as this is something that people didn't talk about so much, because people usually in politics talk about programs. Is he against or for this policy or something? And they less often draw attention to, well, how is this party, this grouping of people that you are part of, that is moving to make that change, how are they organized? And frequently it turns out that they are organized in a rather slavish, passive manner. You know, that they're just the bodies to implement what some leader comes up with, or to make sure that that leader gets elected, or, you know, something like this. And so I think by the 50s, where we are, there's a lot of background. There's nothing mysterious. You know, there are psychological things. He could be reading Wilhelm Reich or something like that, you know, and getting some of the same notions, you know, that so where he's coming from this originally is that, you know, sometimes when you're criticizing something, the thing you're criticizing can be a very powerful enforcement. And in this case, this guy was a Socialism ou Barbarie member, Châtel, and he's writing a review of Godard's first film, actually before Godard was very political, the film Breathless, 1959 or something. And so literally, Châtel is saying, hey, this is really interesting because Godard is presenting modern life. He's giving, you know, he actually quotes Châtel saying that this is presenting people as they live now. And the fact that people in the audience can view this film, they're viewing themselves, and they can criticize it or da 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 da. So that touches Debord off, because he's thinking, okay, this is a guy who is close to me politically, you might say. He's for the same thing. He's for workers' councils and all these good things. But he's coming up with this notion, like, he's just sort of swept away by Godard about how cool that is, that we see people that sort of don't look like old-fashioned people. You know, they look like modern day people. And he's saying, well, yeah, they are sort of more modern, but this is just still kind of phony, because Debord is saying, here, I'll quote it. Châtel thinks that if a portion of the population recognizes itself in a film, it will be able to, quote, look at itself, admire itself, criticize itself, or reject itself. In any case, to use the images that pass on the screen for its own needs, unquote. So that's a really interesting thing there, if it were true. But Debord is immediately saying, and how he poses this is just beautiful, how kind of deadpan, you know, like Loki. He said, so here's Debord. Let us first of all note that there is a certain mystery in this notion of using such a flow of images to satisfy authentic needs. Just how they are to be used is not clear. So understated, it would first of all seem to be necessary to specify which are the needs in question in order to determine whether those images can really serve as means to satisfy them. And of course, when you look at it that way, it completely pulls the rug out from under the whole deal. Furthermore, everything we know about the mechanism of the spectacle, even at the simplest cinematic level, absolutely contradicts this idyllic vision of people equally free to admire or criticize themselves by recognizing themselves in the characters of the film, of a film. And then later on, he says, even if Godard presents people with an image of themselves in which they can undeniably recognize themselves more than in the films of Fernandel, which is a kind of fantasy comic guy, he nevertheless presents them with a false image in which they recognize them falsely. And then he goes on, revolution is not showing life to people, but bringing them to life. A revolutionary, etc. So I think partly he's getting it from past things, like I mentioned, but partly he has taken advantage of this article to say, like, if somebody had not made that claim, it would sound a little abstract for Debord to be talking about what film should do. But here, the guy just, it's just perfect. The guy just comes right in there and presents this great thing. And then Debord is saying, well, that's all sounds very good, but so he's drawing on the guy's presentation of the context in order to clarify, no, it's not that, it's this. Kim.
Thanks, Ken.
There's two questions in the chat. Danny, were you going to say something else? No? Okay. One from Ed Barcelona and one from Mike Ballard. So Ed asks, he says, the importance of the passing of time, the lost moments that will never come back, and the missing chances in our lives seem to play an important role in Sur le Passage and critique. Is it just me, or is there a tone of defeat and gloom unusual for a man in his late 20s, early 30s, full of joie de vivre and adventures in real life? So that's Ed Barcelona's question.
Yeah, I would say if you're really engaged, like Debord was in these things, you're engaged enough to admit defeats and qualifications of stuff. You're not just saying, hey, we're really cool. Sort of like the Beats or something like that say, wow, it's a trip, life is, or the hippies or something, they've got the exuberance there, which is great, the spirit and the energy and experimentation and so on like that. But Debord has also, maybe by having gone through so many of these things, he has the wisdom of an older person, even when he's just in his 20s, to say, yeah, there are these disappointments. He's not saying that such is life. He's saying, the implication is in a different world, things could be done differently, and that's what we're seeking. But even in his later life, when he writes about in the 1980s about his looking back on these things, he says, I've never said that revolution, if it happens, will bring a pure delight to everybody all the time. All it's going to be doing is basically getting rid of some anachronistic bullshit that we don't need. It's arbitrary. In other words, another world is possible. In that other world, we can still have problems, debates, struggles, all sorts of things. And it's not all going to be a bowl of cherries or something. Who knows what it's going to be like? But he's just saying that that's what we're going after, something where we can have real adventures and not be limited to the adventure of, can we please elect somebody else that's not quite as bad? So I guess enough for that. What was Mike's?
Mike asked, he says, I heard you say that the capitalism is a subset of something that's I heard you say that capitalism is a subset of something. That's fascinating. Can you say more? What was the larger set of
No,
which
I
it is?
didn't say that.
Yeah,
actually the spectacle, as Debord notes, is a subset of capitalism. It's just a later stage of capitalism where these things become more and more separated and so on.
I know when I wrote that, and I wrote that to Mike. I'm having problems with directing my messages. I was just asking him because he seemed to think that capitalism was a subset of something, and it just seemed fascinating. I didn't mean to say that you were saying that. You were actually countering Mike and saying that was
Okay.
not the case.
So
But I
anyway,
was
we're
curious.
getting along.
I was curious as long as the subject is up, Mike. You're still there. I'm wondering what you said. It was capitalism was.
Yeah, we're just hold on, Ed. We're already over time.
I
here.
know, but the subject came up, and I just wanted to direct it as long as it's come up. Mike
Well, the
Ballard.
subject of capitalism will be dealt with 2
All
weeks
right, thank you.
in detail. You'll get all of it and more. So I want to thank you for coming and for bearing with me. I'm sorry for the technical issues with the films. But that's one advantage of this book is that you can read them and know exactly what's going on, even if there was a little blip in the spoken part or you couldn't read the subtitles or something. So this one has been recorded, and I'll turn off the recording in just a minute. The next 2 meetings will not be recorded. And the reason they won't be recorded is that I've already recorded similar sessions with them. So I wanted to record this because we've never had a Zoom session for these 3 films. So the next time we will not be watching films during the meetings. I'll explain this in the email tomorrow. You will need to read the script out of this book and then see the film on your own. And it's a dubbed English version, so you don't even have to mess with subtitles. It's a very nice version of the film, The Society of the Spectacle, and one other film that I'll mention. And so then when we come there, the next meeting will be just discussion. It won't be recorded, and therefore it won't just be this Q&A kind of rigid thing. We'll open it up and we can have conversations and arguments and all that for 2 hours about the film. So I look forward to seeing you then. Feel free to bring your friends, and any last okay, we're getting a number of chat things. So again, thank you so much for showing up. And
are we in the recording? Like the
we are
people?
still in the recording, but I think that I will stop the recording now, and then if we have any loose ends, we can still deal with them. So let's see here. I'm going to